I've seen another. Here's one right here. Christine Piper.
Okay.
But she's a lot older than me. But see,
Yeah.
somewhere in here, my cousin is, Rudy Hollenberg,
Oh,
in
yeah.
these pictures.
And Nancy, if we had a pencil, and
Okay.
this is a copy he can write on, we'll just,
There is one school picture that I had.
we're not televising right
No, I
now.
had-
I was just gonna
We
kind
are.
of let him see an overview.
We are.
No, no, this one right here.
But,
Is that the one
yeah.
that you identified? Okay.
I don't know if you got one of the school pictures that I had them all. It
What was her name
19
again?
1932,
What's her name?
Christine Piper. There, let's see who else I can pick out in there. I wish I had the other picture because I have everybody identified. And that was in another book. Whether I sent it to, let's see who else I can find here. But she wore her hair a particular way. That's the only one I could recognize.
Okay.
But I'm trying to. You don't happen to have a 32 picture.
I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll have to flip pages here and see.
Now let me take a look at the basketball team here.
Nancy, if you want to shuffle stuff to him, I can televise. Or if
We are recording now.
we are.
Okay.
And then the next farm was Joe Tenneper. All the Tennepers that lived there. But Stubby and his place, they had a spring. And we used to go out there and get spring water.
When you say across the river, was
Yeah.
that on the east side of the river
Yeah.
then, the big blue?
Yeah, the east side. He had this spring coming down from those hills across the road. And it was all sheltered. And they kept all their dairy products in this spring water. It worked just like a refrigerator. It was that cold. And so that's the only Reddington that I knew.
That you knew of, okay.
Yeah. They were friends of my grandparents.
Okay.
And
Okay.
who'd you say this was?
Gladys is her name.
Oh.
So
And she had a brother that was an
you
artist.
embellish what
Um,
you have already, but then
just I
he'll
could
go
figure-
into areas that
he-
you haven't.
He drew during the WPA
Yeah.
period.
Well,
I can't think of his name. Okay, you're not.
I lived in Irving from 1932 through 1940. My quarters was in my grandfather's hardware store, second floor. His name was R.A. Hollenberg, and he was in the hardware business for about 30 years in Irving. And I was his grandfather's grandson, Charles F. Hollenberg. But I was known in the community with the nickname of Todd. And I've more or less retained that name. All the drawings that are in the museum's collection have been made in the last 15 years, when I finally had time to do them. Some of it is family history, and some of it is community history.
So do you want to hold this up and show it to the camera and then kind of explain it?
Well, let's
That
see
one there,
what one I'm
one of
gonna
them?
start with
Okay,
here.
you start with one of them.
This particular one, Arthur Rudy had a column that happened here. And I had sent her a number of these cartoons. And a few of them she chose to comment in her column. It happened here. Well, this happens to be the first one I picked up. It was an event that occurred in the summer of 1940. There was a local character. He was reputed to be part Cherokee ancestor. That I never was able to confirm. He was known as the town's bootlegger. And he had other nefarious projects that he indulged in. He had quite a collection of Native American stonework, and it was mostly of the implements that were manufactured out of flint was around in this area. At the time, I was employed at the Carlson filling station. And on this particular morning, Freddie Goodman came back to town with 2 bull snakes. When stretched out, came to 6 foot. I think they might have fudged a bit, but they were enormous. And he'd found them in a bush off the banks of the Blue River. He conveniently had a gunny sack. Well, what does a guy carrying a gunny sack do walking the banks of the Blue River in the morning hours? If you had throw lines out, Friday stood a good chance of getting to your line first. And that is why he had the bag, the gunny sack. Well, he was an outdoorsman, that's for sure. And he bagged these 2 bull snakes. Comes back to town. Well, on each side of the street was benches referred to as loafer thrones. And that attracted some of the characters that were reminiscing on those thrones. Dixie Denton was employed at Fred Carlson's station. Actually, he run the place. And at the time this occurred, I was a senior that had graduated from high school. Dixie saw the commotion down the street. I was in the tire room at the time. He said, something's going on down in the main drag. They're out in the main street, more or less in a circle. So I went down there, and Friday was entertaining. He had the snakes out, and they were crawling around. They more or less formed a circle around him. Well, many years later, I made this sketch from memory. And this was the way Aretha printed it in the paper. Or have you got it over there? Well, that's the characters.
Yeah.
Well, across the street is illustrated some of the buildings on the main drag. Don Thompson ran the Palace of Suites. That's the unit to the left side. Then there was Kearney's Market. And I chose to illustrate Verla Kearney at the entry. And I think she was a little provoked that Bill was out in the circle. On the other side of the street was John Hoyt's Produce. John Hoyt's out there. Don Thompson's over at the left. Pete's Cafe across the street. Pete's there.
What was his last name? What was Pete's last name?
Preble. Interesting about Pete Preble, we were related. Something like third or fourth cousins. And many years before, one of the Hollenberg women had married a Preble. And they were my great aunts. So I don't know just what our relationship was. Well, he was out there. There's two other characters I never knew their given name. One was High Pockets, and the other one was Slocum.
Hi, Paula's.
Well, they're both there, as I remember them. The gentleman that is missing his right leg was a retired railroader. And he had, in time, made the mistake and was amputated. He had slipped off the rung of a boxcar. The little house over to the right belonged to Georgia Lees. She was another peculiar person in the town. Whatever became of the snakes, I have no idea. After about an hour, the session broke up. And I wasn't there very long. I had work to do. There's a fat guy there by the name of Cy Stewart. He was rather well-to-do, but he spent most of his times in the cups. Alcoholic.
Here's your town marshal in the back. The town marshal?
Well, that's an interesting thing. The town marshal was allergic to snakes.
Oh, yeah, I heard that.
When I was a freshman in high school, I had a pet bull snake. In fact, I had a regular menagerie in our cop shed. And I had entertained the younger generation with these snakes. I got into the snake business. They had a biology teacher at the Irving High School by the name of Whitey Bird. And I believe it was when I was in the 6th grade that I found out that he would pay 25 cents for any non-lethal snake that I could bring in, and 50 cents for copperheads or moccasins. And they had quite a collection in the second story of the high school of reptiles. Well, my snake business was profitable for about 2 months. And then I was put out of business. I had sold a copperhead to him and my parents found out. So that ended my snake collection. But they put up with my bull snake. And it was around 5 foot in length. And I had that snake for one whole summer. And the guys would get me to come out with the snake and entertain with it. And one time they put me up to stepping up behind the town marshal with the snake. And I pursued him down the main street for about a half a block. And that was Jim Stuyvesant. He never took offense to it. I don't know why not. But I think that pretty well explains the cartoon there. This particular, well, this is back to ancestries. I think I
You
can
need to talk to that one.
talk about this.
Yes, you do.
This establishes pretty well where my great-grandparents arrived. The gentleman that moved up north was my great-grandfather's brother. He established a trading post and founded the towns of Hanover and Hollenberg.
What year was
But
it?
formerly he was over on the Vermilion.
What years were these? What years?
Well, this was 1857 when when he was setting up shop there. But George Henry had been in this country before during the California Gold Rush. And at that time he was around 27.
Do you want me to hold it back?
He was associated somewhat with a Frenchman, and I suppose he was part Indian. There was several historical accounts that said he was French Canadian, whatever that meant. Well, the Frenchman ran the ferry, and it was called a puncheon ferry, and that is a planked bridge crossing. Well, there's a monument over there. It's on the road to Bigelow, and it's on the right side of the road, and it tells about the French fort. And there are survey coordinates on the stone that tells precisely where it was located. Well, when I did photo work of this area a few years back, the guy leasing the land there said, well, it was to one side of what they call the low water bridge. Well, there's a low water bridge over there of concrete slabs, and I suspect that it's right in that particular spot. My great-grandparents they departed Bremen, Germany, somewhere around March 1857. And they arrived in New Orleans in June 1857. Boarded a steamship and had a tour up the Missouri, then to they landed at a place called Iowa Point on the side of the territory of Kansas. And his brother met him with an ox cart, 2 oxen. My great-grandparents and 3 of their children. In round figures, they said the trip was 100 miles by ox wagon.
So Iowa Point was in the Kansas City area?
No, Kansas Territory.
But-
It's north of Kansas City.
North, okay.
Yeah. Iowa Point is over there right now. Well, there's a sign there. And it wasn't a particular historic sign. There was an old iron bathtub there with this sign.
You say you have pictures of a lot of these
I didn't
places?
take a picture of that bathtub.
Could have.
It had no historic significance that I could see. But the sign said Iowa Point. I was pretty disappointed in that because it had been a steamship landing in the 1850s. It was sort of comical to see that there, though.
So did anybody ever talk about